بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر صدق الله العلي العظيم. Our series of lectures have gone into its ninth night. With one more day to go, there is a lot that still needs to be said, and there's a lot of du'as that still need to be answered. According to the ulama of akhlaq, tomorrow night is nothing less than the night of Qadr. In fact, it is said that tomorrow is greater in terms of acceptance of dua. Tomorrow night is the night of Sayyid al-Shuhada. For anyone who has any du'as in their heart, tomorrow is that night that if a person was to sit down and truly open their heart to the Creator, then on that night things get answered and things will be answered. Think of it as your last chance. You know, when a person, knowing that there's nothing left for them, when they sit down broken-hearted and they pull their heart open, at that moment you find that those dua pierces the skies, all seven heavens, and it reaches the arsh of Allah. These are those nights. The day of Ashura will come, and then after that you'll go into your daily routine. We have 2-3 days maximum. Within this time, we need to make a difference. Within this time, we need to make a change. In the tradition it says that on the day of Ashura, when it comes to that Fajr, that morning time, it says that you will see the coming of the Mahdi alayhi salam. Let it be that we see this within our time. Let it be that we see this on Thursday. We are preparing and we are moving. If you understand the philosophy of Ashura, you'll understand the coming of the 12th Imam. You see, just before the coming of the 12th Imam, within the 10 days, you'll find that the Shia will finally get to a stage where they'll truly understand and recognize that Imam. You see, that's the movement of these 10 days. You are moving to a location, and that could be overnight. On the 9th, when the night comes, coming towards the 10th, the Shia will revive themselves. Within a period of 6 or 7 hours, there will be an internal revolution that will take place, and 200 million of you will revive their hearts. And when their hearts open, and when your hands go up in the air, and when that dua comes, go into the tradition and see. If you go to the 19th volume of Bihar al-Anwar, you find this tradition, which is the tradition goes like this. The tradition is from the 9th Imam alayhi salam. There are very few traditions we have of the 9th Imam pertaining to the coming of the 12th Imam alayhi salam. And within this volume 19, when the Imam then talks, you know what he says? He says that the dhuhur of my son the Mahdi, the dhuhur of the Mahdi is like Musa alayhi salam. That when Musa alayhi salam was going at night time, at Maghrib time, he came to the valley, the incident of the burning bush took place. And then after that, when he went to sleep at night time, and when he woke up at Fajr, at that moment then Allah instructed him that get up and go towards the Pharaoh. In the same way the tradition says, that at night time the 12th Imam will go to sleep. At night time, at Maghrib time, he will pray and he'll go to sleep. At the time of Fajr, a voice will come that now it is time to dhuhur now. Now it's time to get up. Now it's time to make that difference. In the tradition it says that he will appear at Fajr time in Mecca. On the one hand you'll find Maqam Ibrahim. On the other hand, he'll be facing one side to Hajar Aswad. And as he stands there in this location, they say that then there will be a cry in the skies. And that cry in the sky will be Jibreel. All over the world the cry will be heard. And that cry will be that Mahdi ala Muhammad has now come. Qad dhahara Mahdi ala Muhammad. He's come now come and give him bay'ah. In the tradition then it says that the very first person who will come, the very first entity that will come will be a dove. As that dove comes from the sky, that dove will come to the ground, and as that dove comes towards the ground, it will expand because it will be Jibreel. And as Jibreel comes, he will put his hand on the hand of the 12th Imam, and at that moment he will give bay'ah. And from then onwards will begin the entire silsila, the chain of giving allegiance to the 12th Imam. You see, these are those nights where at least now start giving your allegiance to that Imam, so when the time does come, it will be easier for you to give that allegiance. And so the tradition says that 40 people, those 40 will then come wherever they are in the world. You know what it says in the tradition? It goes like this. It says that there will be two types of people. Again, if you go to volume 23, two types of people. One type of person who within a blink of an eye will be there. The minute he stands up, the minute he thinks, he will be there straight away. The other type of person, and in the tradition it says that it's more honorable for him. There will be more reward for him. It will come in the skies. It will take him some time, but he'll travel in the sky. And eventually he'll get there. Two types of people, Amir al-Mu'mineen is predicting. One of those people who will be there in a blink of an eye. Those people who can travel through space and time in a blink of an eye, will get there. Dayul ard, the ability to move through space and time in a blink of an eye. I remember once I asked an Arif, I said, what does it mean that you travel through space and time in a blink of an eye? How do you get to that stage? What is it that you do? What happens to the world? He says, it's not the fact that your body disappears. It's the fact that when you want it, the earth smallens for you. The entire mileage of the earth comes in such a way that if you wanted to get from London to Toronto, the entire world ceases and you take a footstep and you're there. The entire world crams together. So in this way you find that those 40 people who are waiting for the coming of the Imam, the minute that they want it, you'll find the earth compresses, and as the earth compresses, you see it defies physics, right, in one way, the compression of the earth. But realize one thing, al-insan al-kamil, or the tajalli of insan kamil, who are those followers of the Imams, when you find them, when they come, they control two things. One is physical matter and the other one is form. They're able to control that. When you're able to control that, you can compress that. And when you can compress that, within a blink of an eye, you can appear wherever you want to. A friend of mine once said, 13 years ago, he said that we'd heard that there was a person in Karbala. We'd heard there was a person in Karbala who had the ability to travel through this space and time in a blink of an eye. But the thing about these people are that they don't want the world to know. You see, they run away from fame because they know that through fame, what happens is this entire connection diminishes. For 1 second, if the nafs gets involved, you find all of the things that you've been working for crashes down. This is why they say, the higher the maqam is, the harder it is when you crash down. Look at tradition and see, why has Fir'aun been cursed? Haven't we seen tyrants like Namrud before? Why is it these two specifically have been cursed? In such a way, have there not been tyrants? Didn't Stalin kill 20 million people in Russia? Haven't you seen Hitler do what he did? Why is it that these two people have been called in such a way and they've been cursed in such a way? The reason being is that they understood Tawheed. You see, they were followers of Tawheed to a level, but then they went against Allah. They had that connection, there was that power there. If you go back to Egypt and you go back to the history of Egypt, some of the first schools of mysticism going back to the cult of Osiris in the time of Idris. Idris, the prophet, taught the Egyptians the power of mysticism. And from there you see later on the rise of the Pharaoh. Technically, who was the Pharaoh? The Pharaoh was meant to be the perfect man, the one who combines the metaphysical realms and the physical realms. You see, the Pharaoh had the knowledge of God, but the fact was that he got to a stage where his arrogance took over. You see that takabbur inside of him, that nafs inside of him, that he stands up and he says that I am your Lord. Ana rabbukum al-a'la. Am I not your Lord? I am your Lord, the Most High. You see, in this way what you find is that anyone at any stage, at any time can fall. And when they fall, the higher you are, the harder you fall. In the tradition it says, Shimr was in the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Battle of Siffin. When he fell in such a way that today everyone curses him. The higher you are, the more you go up. When you fall, it's hard. Shaitan, Iblis, look at his example. Who was he? Tradition says he was neighbors with Jibreel. When there was bloodshed on the world, and when a nation was wiped out, Allah raised one person, and that person was Iblis. When he raised him to the heavens, in the tradition it says he worshipped Allah in the way nobody else worshipped him. One day, Allah declares that one of you in this place, in this realm, will go off the track. You'll go off and you'll become somebody who's accursed. You'll become a shaitan, basically. And at that moment, all of the angels gathered, and all of the people of the heavens gathered, and they gathered with each other, and they said, who is this person going to be? But you know what? We know that there's a pious man, and go to that pious man. He's from the jinn, but when he prays for us, Allah will accept his prayers. All of the angels went, and all of the angels went towards this person. And as this person saw that this massive crowd of people are coming, he comes out of his house. He says, what's happened? They say, Allah has declared that one of us will become shaitan. Pray for us, please, that it's not one of us. This person, Iblis, raises his hands and he prays. Allah accepted his prayer. He made sure that none of those people who he prayed for became the shaitan. But Iblis was cocky, he was arrogant. What happened? He forgot to pray for himself. He thought that I'm going to be guided, I will be. The arrogance kicked in. What happened? That person became the shaitan. So now see within your own life, can this happen to me? Is my arrogance taking over? Sometimes I feel that because I can pray Salatul Layl, that makes me special. Who's special? Special is that one who destroys his nafs, understands his poverty. Each one of you, we are all fuqara in Allah. In front of Allah, we are paupers. The Prophet of God says in a very famous tradition, if you can understand this tradition, you understand your reality. The Prophet says that the fact that we're all fuqara, he looks towards himself, he says, but I'm the biggest faqir. I'm the most, in terms of my poverty, the most needy when it comes to Allah. Understand your poverty. Understand the fact that you are poor in the eyes of Allah. You are needy in the eyes of Allah. When you understand this, Allah gives you hakimiyya, power over all of creation. Of all of creation, when you understand your poverty. This is why the fourth Imam says in a tradition, very famously, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam says, in a dua he says, Allah, and do not make me ghafil, do not make me a person who forgets you even for 1 second, that when I breathe in, I think that I'm going to breathe out again. Make sure that on every single breath that I take in, that I know it is you that helps me breathe out again. Look now and see, if you're walking this earth, it is because Allah wants you to walk this earth. It's the lutf of Allah, it's the grace of Allah. Your 2 feet, tomorrow these 2 feet cannot be there. Tomorrow you can have an accident. Tomorrow you can have a heart attack. Tomorrow people will die around you. Tomorrow you can go bankrupt. Tomorrow anything can take place. It is Allah who keeps you where you are today. So understand that for every small detail in our life, even the breath that we take, the friends that we meet, the relationships which we have, for everything you find that we are needy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What did Sayyid al-Shuhada? Look at the power of Sayyid al-Shuhada. When he stands there on that final day, everyone has gone around him. Everyone's been killed. Heart is heavy. Sayyid al-Shuhada has tears in his eyes. But he looks up, looks towards the heavens, sees the Creator everywhere. And at that moment he says, Allah, what makes it easier for me is the fact that you are watching. Is the fact that you are watching. So what makes it easier? You see, pain, right? Pain is diminished when we realize the absolute power is watching. You're able to overcome trial and tribulation in your life, knowing the fact that the absolute Creator, the one who's the best of all creators, is watching. The one who's God over all, over everything. When He's watching, it makes it more easier for us. That you know there is a power which controls me and which controls you. This is what that maqam is, which is that maqam of tawakkul. A person who gets to that stage where full reliance that everything he has is for the Creator. You see, this is what you need to install within your life. You'll see automatically your problems fall off then. Let me give you an example. You know what happens? You've heard of the story of Ya'qub and Yusuf, right? Ya'qub and Yusuf. Let me ask you a question. Why was Yusuf separated from Ya'qub? If anyone can answer this question, why was Yusuf separated from Ya'qub? I've only found one tradition, and that was narrated by Khur Amali, the compiler of Wasail al-Shia. One tradition. You know what he says? He says the reason why Ya'qub was separated from Yusuf was one reason. And that was because of his akhlaq. One reason. You see, how important is it? How important is it to take care of society, to take care of the people around you, to open your heart up, to become selfless? Let me tell you this story. And see Ya'qub the prophet. He didn't commit a sin. But sometimes you realize the highest the maqam is, even if you commit something which is not a sin, you come crashing down. What was Ya'qub? Ya'qub was a prophet. Ya'qub doesn't sin, he's infallible. Now the tradition says this. One night, a waliullah is walking and he comes to Egypt, and he comes to that area where Ya'qub was. This waliullah, this friend of Allah, hadn't eaten. He was hungry. And as this man comes forward, he comes and he knocks on the door of Ya'qub, and the children of Ya'qub come, and the children of Ya'qub, as they're there, Ya'qub is standing there, and the question is asked, this wali, this beggar, He was a beggar, nobody knew his reality. Asks Yaqub, family of Yaqub. He says, Yaqub, O family of Yaqub, do you have any food to eat? I'm hungry. Yaqub only had enough food to feed his family. His children look upon this beggar and they say that there is no food here, nothing to eat. That night the children of Yaqub eat, and full belly they go to sleep. This one man, this waliullah, starts to walk, and as he walks into the desert, he raises his hands at night time when he's hungry, and he says, Allah, your prophet has turned me away. I'm hungry. You know what Allah does? Allah gets angry. He says that this was my friend. You turned away my friend. He says, as a retaliation so that you can humble yourself, I will separate Yusuf from you. 33 years Yaqub and Yusuf were separated. Now, if you're going to give a salawat in the way that it should be given. What does that tell you? That tells you be very careful who you hurt. Be very careful who you turn away from your door. Be very careful, because who knows, that beggar who's coming to your door, if he was to raise his hands, what would happen? You don't know. Yaqub is separated. 33 years later now, Yaqub is sitting there. But this is a point for all of us as well. Do not ever lose faith in Allah. Do not ever lose faith in the mercy of God. Yaqub is a prophet. Allah is teaching him a lesson. What is this lesson? 33 years later he realizes this lesson. As he's sitting there, gone blind, he's crying. Knock on the door comes, a light comes in through his door. Yaqub looks towards that light. He says, Jibreel, you've come. Jibreel says, Yaqub, why do you cry for? He says, because I've been separated from my Yusuf. One Yusuf. 33 years Yaqub cried. When they were asking Imam Zain al-Abidin, why have you cried for 34 years? He says, Yaqub lost one Yusuf, he cried. I've lost 18 Yusufs, shouldn't I cry? At that point, Jibreel says, Yaqub, why do you cry for? He says, I cry because I've lost Yusuf. He said, what does Yusuf mean to you? He says, Yusuf was a mirror that I saw God in. I saw the manifestations of God in. Yusuf was my mirror, that all of the tajalliyat, the jamal and the jalal of Allah, I would see through him. Is the fact that I've lost Yusuf. Yusuf took me, he was a wasila for me that took me to Allah. He says, I've lost my Yusuf. You know, Jibreel says, he says, Yaqub, tell me, when was it that your ancestor Ibrahim was united with Ismail? He says, tell me, Jibreel, when was it? He said that when he forgot the fact of himself, and he put full reliance into Allah. The minute he put full reliance into Allah, the minute he realized that the sustenance is given, and the Prophet remembers all of these things, but sometimes it's important to divorce yourself from your emotions. And he asks him, he says, who gives Yusuf sustenance? He says, Allah does. And he says, who helps Yusuf? He says, Allah does. And who helps you? He says, Allah does. Who is the person then? Every inch and every aspect is from Allah. At that moment, he says, what about Ibrahim then? When was that moment? He says that when Ibrahim lost that hope in him and he gave all of his hope to Allah. So essentially didn't lose hope. He gave everything towards Allah. When he gave everything towards Allah and he forgot about that grief of his, at that moment Allah united Ismail with Ibrahim. In this way, Yaqub turns around, moves away, and he says, that's it. I've placed everything within God in this way. I will not cry for him anymore now, because I know Allah is all powerful and he is watching. At the moment that realization hit him, at that very moment the news came, Yusuf has come back. And at that moment, when Yusuf says to his brothers, give my shirt, take it to my father, tell him to put it on his eyes. Now let me ask you a question. When the flag of Abul Fadl comes, what is that flag? It is a nisbah to Abul Fadl al-Abbas. When you go to Karbala and you kiss the zarih, why do you kiss it? It's a nisbah to Sayyid al-Shuhada. When you look at the member of the Prophet, why do you look at this member? Because there's a nisbah. Where do we get that? From the Quran. Where does it say in the Quran? Yusuf says, take my shirt. He doesn't say, take myself. Take my shirt, give it to my father. Who's the father? Father is a prophet. Who's giving it a prophet? Yaqub takes this cloth. He puts it on his eyes. This is an intercessory means for him. A prophet of God takes a shirt which symbolizes Yusuf, puts it on his eyes. What happens? Allah gives his eyesight back. You see, in this way, when a Wahhabi comes to you and says to you, why do you do this? Why do you kiss the Quran for? Why do you kiss the Zarif for? Why do you go to the Prophet of God's grave? Know that if it's sufficient for a Prophet of God that a shirt can give him shafa'ah, then on these 10 nights before and on the day of Ashura, imagine what Sayyid al-Shuhada can give you. Which Sayyid al-Shuhada? Have you ever thought about who Sayyid al-Shuhada is? Think about who Sayyid al-Shuhada is. 124,000 prophets. The summary of all of those prophets rests in the final prophet. And the completion of the deen and the completion of the risala of the final prophet rests in the wala of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Who saves the entire deen? Sayyid al-Shuhada. That's why when you stand in front of his grave, what do you say? Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adama. Exactly. Why do you say that? Because he is the warith of all of the Anbiya, that's why. What does that mean? That means the Kamal of Yusuf is in Hussein. The Kamal of Isa is in with Hussein. The Kamal of Musa is in with Hussein. Who is Hussein then? Hussein is the successor to all of the prophets. If Yusuf's shirt has that much power, then the dirt from the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada has that much power that it can even raise a person who's ill, and it can even raise the dead. That is the power of that dirt of Sayyid al-Shuhada. This is why we find in a tradition that when a person has a dua that's not being asked, if you were to take that dirt from the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada and you were to raise it in the heavens, raise it up, and you were to ask for the sake of that, At-Tin al-Qabr al-Hussein, you find that straight away Allah answers. It's the power of that. What is Sayyid al-Shuhada? The dirt, forget Sayyid al-Shuhada. The dirt from the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Let me give you a tradition. Maybe with this tradition, you may understand the maqam of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Say that there's a tradition that says, Rasulullah standing there in Masjid al-Nabawi, he stands next to the mihrab, and as he stands there, he says, Allahu Akbar. At that moment, a child comes, the child stands next to him, the child also says, Allahu Akbar. But the child is small, he can't pronounce it. So as he can't pronounce it, Rasulullah again says, Allahu Akbar. Again the child tries to say it. Again he can't pronounce it. Third time says, fourth time says, fifth time, sixth time. On the seventh time he says, Allahu Akbar. The child says, Allahu Akbar. Jibreel comes down. He says, from today onwards, reciting 6 Allahu Akbars before the 7th one, before you enter the prayers, has become mustahab on this nation. Why? Because this 3-year-old child standing there is none other than Sayyid al-Shuhada Hussein ibn Ali. The sanad of this is sahih. It has been narrated by Maraja on this particular, that the reason why you open your prayers by saying 6 Allahu Akbars before you go into the final one, the 7th one, is because of the fact that Sayyid al-Shuhada said it. So 7. Why 7? Because the hujab are 7. Hijab between us and Allah 7. And in the same way in the tradition it says that when you go into sajda, if you were to prostrate on the ground of Karbala, on the grave, the dirt from the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the power of this is that it breaks 7 layers of hijab. Those 7 layers symbolize the 7 layers separation that we have between us and Allah. At the beginning you find Sayyid al-Shuhada's wasila. At the end you find Sayyid al-Shuhada's wasila. Why do we prostrate then on this turba of Sayyid al-Shuhada? Go back to the tradition and see. The very first person to do that was Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. That on the day of Arba'in, when he goes to the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada, he takes the dirt from that grave, and then after that he spends his life prostrating on that. He kept it with him. Whenever he prayed on that dirt. So these traditions which we have, that we take lightly and we take for granted, all of them going back to the Aimma alayhimus salam. So who is Sayyid al-Shuhada then? He is the warith of all of the Anbiya. Here you find, what was the purpose of me mentioning this? One reason. You see the highest maqam you have, when you fall, it hurts. It hits you hard. You fall down. So in this way, when you're preparing yourself, make sure that you prepare yourself by removing the arrogance which is within you, because it's this arrogance that takes you away from the path of the 12th Imam. If we are moving slowly but surely and coming towards the path of the Imam alayhi salam, it is important for us then to become selfless. There are 3 things, if you go back 2 nights ago, that we mentioned that on the point of your death, you can die the death of a kafir. The first thing we mentioned was jealousy, right? There are 2 more things that need to be discussed. Once we've discussed these things, then we can move on. If we are trying to improve ourselves, if we are trying to remove the dirt in ourselves, if we are trying to prepare for the coming of the Imam, It's important that we remove those negative characteristics. One of them was jealousy. What is the second one? If you look at the second one, you find that within our societies, that second one holds. You know what that second one is? You can die the death of a kafir if you have this particular trait in you. One of them was what? Jealousy. The second one is this. Now look inside of your communities and see if you have that. The second one is what? Backbiting. 1/3 of the pressure of the grave, where the sixth Imam alayhi salam says, he says on the day of judgment, our shafa is there. Our intercession is there. But in your graves we fear for you, because in your graves you're alone. It is you and your deeds. Now imagine this. We talked about the fact that you're dying, right? Imagine you're dead. Imagine your body has been taken. It's going to happen to you one day. Our body will be taken. People will be with us if we're lucky, and they'll take you to a grave which is 6 foot deep, and they put you in that grave. You're surrounded in that grave, you're looking up. If you're claustrophobic, you'll probably have another heart attack in your grave. They put you in that grave, and now they're chucking dirt on you. And as they chuck dirt on you, you're saying, don't leave me. It's painful. Tons of dirt is coming on you. When that dirt comes on you, the tradition says, your grave starts squeezing you. When it squeezes you, it's like your ribs are being broken, as your body is being broken. Everything of yours is crushing, it's squeezing you. How do you prevent that from taking place? One of the ways you prevent that, 1/3 of the pressure of the grave, is found within backbiting. Backbiting. What is backbiting? Don't you see it within our societies and communities? Backbiting means this, the technical definition. We feel backbiting means slandering. Slandering is another sin altogether. Backbiting means that you point out an aib of a person which he has. Backbiting means he has that deficiency. Slandering means he doesn't have that deficiency. Backbiting means he has that. If he's fat, he's fat. You know he's fat, I know he's fat, he knows he's fat. For you to say to another person he's fat, and if it was to hurt him, means it's backbiting. Backbiting therefore means that any deficiency that a person has, if you were to make it apparent to another person, that is backbiting. Now many of us turn around and say, if he was there, I'd say it to his face. If you say it to his face, you do 2 sins. One is backbiting, the other one's hurting the person. 2 sins. 2 sins straight away would come. The argument that I'd say it to his face, therefore I'm backbiting him behind his back, doesn't hold. Anything that offends or hurts a person is backbiting, right? In what conditions are we allowed? If you look at the ulama of akhlaq, even if you look at Sayyid al-Khou'i when he gave his Ba'ath al-Kharij in this particular thing, and then when he talks about the adala of a person, when he talks about the justice of the imam, he says one of the criteria is that he doesn't commit the kabair. One of the kabairs, one of the major sins is what? The major sins is backbiting. If you look towards backbiting, you'll see. If you see a person on the road, let's say for example some of our youth, you see them walking with a girl. Now rather than coming to Bathurst and after the prayer, announcing it, if you see that that person feels shame, and I've seen this many a time, walking in the streets, a guy from the mosque, he's probably 16 or 17, he's walking with a girl, the minute he sees me, one runs into one shop and the other one runs into the shop. Now that moment in time, what do? If I go and tell his parents, what's going to happen? He's feeling embarrassed. If he's feeling ashamed, if you see a person sinning, they feel embarrassed, ashamed, they don't want you to know, it becomes haram upon you to declare. It's only when a person doesn't care anymore, he's walking, he doesn't care what anyone thinks. At that moment, he's openly committing fisk. At that moment then, he becomes a fasik. See, openly, a person who's openly, in fact, even if he does it not openly, becomes a fasik, but that's besides the point. The fact is, you can only open up about a person's sins if he doesn't care himself about his sins. But if you see a person who's caring about that, if you see a person who feels embarrassed, it is not up to you to declare that person's sins. Know one thing, Allah hides your sins. If it wasn't for the fact that Allah didn't hide it, He would have opened all of those sins in front of the world. He hides them. He puts them behind. If Allah hides your sins, who are you to open up other people's sins? You see, if our community and our society today observe just this thing, that we are not going to backbite, tomorrow your death would have been easy and your society would have been flourishing. But the fact that we are backbiting within our societies means then today that our society is where it is. You see, and this is not just for the people, this is also for everyone, whether you're an alim or non-alim. Don't backbite. Don't backbite about the other people, scholars, whatsoever. We feel that we have the right to insult a scholar. We feel that we have a right to talk about how much knowledge, how our lack of knowledge he has. You see, this comes out of jealousy. They say, when they talk about jealousy, right, they say from 10 parts, 9 of them are found in the ulama. It's a damning tradition as well. But that doesn't mean that you run away from the ulama. See, alim rabbani, as we said, is that person who revives your soul. He's the link between you and the imam of the times, the alim rabbani. When the alim rabbani prays, in fact, in the tradition it says on the day of judgment he intercedes. So maybe from all of these hundreds of ulama, there may be one guy who wears the garms. It's like when a thief came into Fayziya once within Qum and he robbed, and this is going back 30, 40 years ago. Someone comes to the marja, says, look, an alim has robbed. The marja turns around and says, don't say the alim has robbed, say that a thief dressed in the clothes of an alim has come and robbed. This is what the alim is something else, alim rabbani. So if you ever hear, and sometimes it happens when alim gets up and he says, and he's not really an alim because in character he's not an alim. The majority of our alims are good, but if he gets up and he backbites about another one, he doesn't have enough knowledge, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, he didn't do the other. You know that look, you know what, the ego is taken over, the jealousies come in. But when you look at an alim, you find him humble in everything. He encourages people, he helps people, he guides people. You don't see anything negative from him. Some of our ulama, you find many of our ulama like that. I remember Ayatollah Langrudi in my lifetime when I saw him from very close up. The man was such that even if a person wronged him, he would never talk negatively about him. Never. In fact, a lot of times, you know what happened, and I learned one thing from this Ayatollah. One thing I learned from it is that when a person wasn't there, he never spoke about him positively or negatively. You know why? Because a lot of times we start off our conversations positively. Oh, look at him, he's such a good guy. 30 seconds down the line, after boosting him up, then you take him down. And it happens a lot of times in our conversations. Look how good that guy is. He drives such a nice car. But you know what? You know what I saw him do last night? No, what did he do last night? He spat in the corner of the mosque. Really, is that what he did? And from then onwards, Bismillah, ila mashallah, you've just gone and eaten everything. You know, they say eating the flesh of your dead brother, you've gone and finished the whole dead brother off. You know, all 90 kilos of him, 6 foot of him, you've gone and you've fried him and you've eaten him. Within half an hour you've done that. So a lot of times we start off positively about a person. We start off talking positively, we go into the negativity, we destroy him. So the best thing to do, why talk about people negatively? Why do that? We got time to waste. If you've got time to waste, and do it. Is your life such a waste that you have to talk about other people? Why don't we focus in our life? Make the covenant within ourselves that what we're going to do in this lifetime is achieve something. And that achievement is a 12th Imam. So backbiting. Now go back into the other traditions. See, with backbiting couples another thing. You know what that is? Go back to yesterday's lecture. We were talking about the system of Dajjal. If you want to prevent yourself from the Dajjal, and remember, Dajjal comes into you. You know what Dajjal says? The difference between Sufyan and Dajjal is, Sufyan is your open enemy. He will kill you. There'll be bloodshed. The Imam is saying that when Sufyani comes into Sham, even if you're underground, he will take you from the ground, he will take you out, and he will kill you. And at that moment, understand, Sufyani, bloodshed. But the Dajjal will be someone who will come as your friend. I'm your friend. And he'll cut you from behind so nicely you won't even realize. What is one of the tools of the Dajjal then? One of the tools of the Dajjal is gossiping. They say when gossiping comes, barakah is taken away. Sometimes you think to yourself, why is my rizq so restricted? It's because of gossiping. You find that we live in a society full of gossip. Go to any magazine, go to the front pages of the news, from OK to hello, right? All of it is gossip. We live in a culture, a society of gossip, that the first 3 or 4 pages of your newspapers is, for example, what David Beckham ate for lunch or dinner. If he ate something special, it's going to be there. And then you find the tragedy that's taking place, let's say, for example, in Afghanistan, is on the 15th page. And sometimes it's not even narrated. It's not even written what's happening in the world. We are living in a system of gossip, and our children are being taught that. If you look in the news, what do you find? Celebrity culture. Why is this celebrity culture taking off? Because of the system of gossip which we have. When that gossip, and you know, you find that, right? When you come and see a friend after a long time, you say, so what's the latest gossip then? What's happening with that brother? You know, I heard, for example, that he had 12 eggs last night. Really, what's happened to him? Why is he eating so much? Gossip, and everything then starts from there. Gossip. Don't we have it in our societies? We laugh, but we have it in our societies. We have all of that. What's the latest gossip? Do you know Fulani person in Zanzibar did this? Or did you hear about the Fulani person while he was playing football, he tripped over, he hurt his leg? One thing is news, the other thing is gossip, and then it breaks from there. From falling and slipping and breaking his leg, you're talking about his business acquisitions, and then after that you're talking about his family and his children, and the next thing you know is front broad news all over the community. Why does Allah say then? Why is there a tradition that says if a person commits zina, 4 witnesses are required? The reason why 4 witnesses is because Allah wants to hide these things so that it doesn't come out. That's one of the reasons. He could have said 2 witnesses. It says 4 witnesses. And those 4 witnesses at the same time have to see the action take place. Why 4 witnesses? Because you know it's virtually impossible unless they're an exhibitionist for 4 witnesses to come forward. The purpose of this is what then? The purpose of this is that it doesn't become apparent within society. Sometimes when sins are spread in society, it destabilizes society. And for this way we've been told, don't gossip in society. It destroys your community fabrics. If you want to see why a community slides, it's because of these things: gossip, backbiting, jealousy. All of these three traits. Allah doesn't turn around and say, for example, that if a person doesn't give zakat or khums, social system is something. Yes, not giving zakat, khums is a sin. Why? Because it's wajib upon you to do that. And if you don't give zakat or khums, it's like you're taking in haram, right? It's the same thing as certain people did when they usurp fadak. You're usurping the fadak of the imam. When you curse certain people or you ask Allah to remove them away from you, what are you doing? You're cursing yourself essentially. If you are eating the mal of the imam, if you're not giving khums, you're not giving zakat. But that's a different story altogether. The fact of the matter is this: when it comes to social issues, Allah looks upon them because you're destabilizing society. When you destabilize society, you're not progressing. Remember, the coming of the imam is not just individual, it's an entire society moving in a positive direction. Make sure you are that society which is moving in that positive direction. Become one of those people who are in touch with the imam. What is your duty then? You see, when you realize that I have to fight against this ego, when you realize that I have to become selfless, when every night for 2 minutes or even 1 minute or 30 seconds, you sit there at night time and you say to yourself, what did I do negatively in the day? What did I do positively in the day? When you fight against that nafs, essentially you are building a connection. When the realization comes that you have duties to the imam, straight away then, at least be one of those people who fulfills those duties. What are your duties to the imam? Listen to this and see. If you go into the tradition, you find it says giving sadaqah for the sake of the imam on a daily basis. How many of us do that? When you're in problems, calling for the imam. On a Friday, you know that salah that you recite 100 times? When you go to Jam Quran, you recite this as well. What do you recite? Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. That salah which is there, to recite that, there are many things that we have for the imam that we need to do, which we're not doing on a daily basis. Ask help from your imam. One of the things that the imam requires you to do is that when you are in problems, ask help. Some of the urafa say when you wake up in the morning, give salam to your imam, and when you go to sleep at night time, give salam to your imam. It builds that connection with the imam alayhi salam. Try and build that connection. Ask help from the imam. Know that the imam is here to help you. Let me give you a tradition. Maybe this tradition will emphasize this. One day they say Muqaddas Ardabili, 400 years ago. You've heard this tradition, but it's the summary that I want to take you towards. Muqaddas Ardabili, one night had a very big problem. And so Muqaddas Ardabili comes out of his house. Najaf he was. Which Muqaddas Ardabili? Listen to this. Who is Muqaddas Ardabili? Muqaddas Ardabili is that person who the Imam called Muqaddas. Sheikh Ahmad Muqaddas Ardabili. Sheikh Ahmad Muqaddas Ardabili became this person because of the fact that he was very vigilant over himself. He gave the haqq of the people in a very vigilant way. He was very daqiq, he was very precise in everything that he did. The tradition says this, right? That one day Muqaddas Ardabili was going by foot to ziyarah. And as he was going by foot, a person comes to him and he says, take this letter and deliver it, let's say, to Karbala. When you get there, my brother will be there. You know what Muqaddas Ardabili does? As he takes it, he gets off his horse and he begins to walk Somebody asked him, why are you walking for? He says, when I took this horse, I took it for only this luggage. Now that a person has given me a letter, I have not paid that person for the sake of this letter, and so therefore I'm walking. It's not a man who lived 1,000 years ago, a man who lived in the time of the Safavis. A man who lived in the time of the Safavis. This is what he says. Look at the other story. They say one of the ulama from Isfahan came to meet Muqaddas al-Dabili in Najaf. And he says to him, why don't you come to Iran? Why don't you come to Iran to meet the Safavi king? Know that he's a Shia. Know that he's a Syed. Know that, and he pumps it up and he says, why don't you come? At that moment, he says, fine, let's go. They say Sheikh Ahmed was riding on his horse, but his horse was an old horse. It wasn't going that fast. So what happens is that this alim comes back and he says, why don't you ride faster? He says, because my horse is old. And at that moment, he says, look, your horse can go faster. He took his whip and he whipped the other horse. So the horse went slightly faster. Muqaddas stops his horse. He says, why did you touch my horse without my permission? You as an alim, if you're touching like that, and if you can do that, then what can the king, the Safavi king, do? He says, I don't want to go to Iran. He turns his horse back and he goes back to Najaf. A man who was very simple, but a man who was very precise in his dealings. Here you find now, Muqaddas al-Dabili. Why did he become Muqaddas? As he was walking one day, a rider comes. And as this rider comes, he says to him, where are you going, man? He says, I'm going to this particular location. He says, why don't you come on my horse? He says, why? He says, because I'm going to that location. He says, fine. Can you drop? He says, yes, I can drop you. Muqaddas al-Dabili gets on this horse and the rider now begins to ride. And as he begins to ride, he says, what's your name? He says, Ahmed. He says, where are you from? He says, Ardabil. The rider now, as he begins to ride, he speaks to Muqaddas al-Dabili. He says, do you know Fulani Alim in Fulani place in Ardabil? He says, yes, I know him. How is he like? He says, he's a very good man. He says, do you know this person living in this street? He says, yes. He says, how is this person? He says, he's a very good man. One by one, the rider begins to list, and one by one, Muqaddas answers, and he says, he's a very good man, he's a very good man, he's a very good man. Until that moment comes. He says, I've heard that there is an alim by the name of Sheikh Ahmed who is known as Muqaddas al-Dabili. How is he like? At that moment, Muqaddas al-Dabili turns around and he says, you don't know about that, man. People call him Muqaddas, but I don't think he's really Muqaddas. He says, you know what? He's fighting against his nafs. He isn't what you think he is. The rider smiles. He looks back, says, Sheikh Ahmed, if you weren't what I'm trying to say that you are, if you weren't Muqaddas al-Dabili, you wouldn't be on the horse of the 12th Imam alayhi salam. Says you wouldn't be on the horse of the 12th Imam. That's Muqaddas al-Dabili. That Muqaddas al-Dabili, in a final story, that Muqaddas al-Dabili begins to walk. Nighttime he has a problem, doesn't know what to do. Whenever he had a problem, come to the haram of the Imam, send salam to Amir al-Mu'mineen, the gates would open, he would go inside. Says that night one of his students were following him and he saw the gates open, Muqaddas goes inside, and as he goes inside, he comes back out again. And when he comes back out, his face is almost shaking, his body is shaking, he's sweating, and he begins to ride very fast. Now this guy's watching him ride, and he sees he comes to Masjid al-Sahla, and he goes into Masjid al-Sahla. He doesn't know what's happened. Muqaddas al-Dabili comes out again. It's a very long story. I'm compressing the story. As he comes out, and as always happens, either the guy sneezes or he falls over, his laces are undone, something happens, Muqaddas al-Dabili realizes that there's someone following me. He turns around and he says, what have you seen? He said, I've seen everything. And at that moment, the student holds his hands together and he said, look, tell me, what is all this? Muqaddas says, I'll tell you on one condition, that in my lifetime you don't tell anyone. He says, fine. At that moment he says, whenever I have a problem, I would go to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, it would be answered. In the same way as ulama even today can do that. I remember one Ayatollah in Qum said to me, directly he said that for my brother-in-law was a friend of Shaheed al-Sadr. He says that my brother-in-law in a dream saw, and again he was a mujtahid in Najaf, he says, my brother in his dream saw that Amir al-Mu'mineen came to him and said, this Baqir al-Sadr hasn't come to take lessons from me, it's been 3 days. He says at that moment, he said, I went to Baqir al-Sadr, I said, I saw this dream whereby Amir al-Mu'mineen saying you haven't come to the haram for 3 days to take lessons. Baqir al-Sadr said, actually, your dream is right. For 3 days I've had works in my house, I couldn't go to the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That's a guy died in 79, 78. There are people like that who take knowledge from Amir al-Mu'mineen. So don't ever think that why did Muqaddas Ardabili said, when I went to Amir al-Mu'mineen, that day Amir al-Mu'mineen was in Jalal. Now imagine Amir al-Mu'mineen in Jalal. It's enough to make you fall down, basically. I was going to say something else, but it's enough to make you fall down. Muqaddas Ardabili. Who are we in front of Amir al-Mu'mineen? When that Imam comes into Jalal, even Saifullah nearly fainted. When Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Amir al-Mu'mineen now says to him, don't you believe in the imamat of my son, the Mahdi? He says, Mawla, I do, of course I do. He says, why don't you ask him for help then? He says, because Mawla, I don't know where he is. He goes, go into Masjid al-Sahla, you'll see him. As he goes towards Masjid al-Sahla, he sees the 12th Imam is sitting there. The 12th Imam is his head down. The 12th Imam is upset. The tradition says, Muqaddas Ardabili looks towards the 12th Imam. He forgets his question. You can see the tears in his eyes. He says, Mawla, tell me, why are you upset for? What makes you so upset? He says, Muqaddas, why is it that when my Shia have a problem, they don't ask me for help? So why don't they ask me for help for? I'm for them, I'm here for them. I'm here to help them, why don't they ask me? You know, Muqaddas Ardabili replies, he says, Mawla, but the problem is we don't know where to find you. You know what the 12th Imam replies? He replies and he says, tell my Shia, when they call for help, when they say, Ya Mahdi Adrikni, they don't need to find me, I'll find them. Wherever you are, the 12th Imam will come and help you. What greater do you want than you're the Imam of your time? It's like that tradition of Najashi, right? When Najashi, who you know who Najashi was? Najashi was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen. You know what Najashi used to do? Najashi would drink. They say in Kufa, Najashi in the month of Ramadan was drinking. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to him, Najashi, why are you drinking for? Don't you know I'm going to have to lash you? You know that tradition, right? He goes towards, he says, fine, I can't take the justice of the Imam. And goes towards Muawiyah. Muawiyah says to Najashi, look, Najashi, you've come. Alcohol, women, whatever you want is open. Najashi takes the glass, and as he's about to drink it, Muawiyah says one thing. He says, look, even the friends of Ali leave Ali. Demolishes the glass, comes back. What was the Imam doing? At night time, when Najashi's heart is bursting, and Najashi wants to come back, and he wants to kiss Amir al-Mu'mineen, at night time he thinks to himself, Imam will be busy. When he comes to the door opens up, 2 arms come out. Najashi, if you've been missing me, I've been missing you. The same thing with the Imam of the time. It is our sins that takes us and drives us away from that Imam. The Imam is waiting for you. My Shia, come back to me. What are we doing? Moving away from the Imam. Whenever you have a problem, when those tears come into your eyes and you raise your hands, seek the Imam. Say, Mawla, we don't have anyone but you. Who's going to accept? Who's going to pray for us? Who do we have? The Imam then says in a tradition, when the swords of your enemy are between your necks, then call upon me, I will come and I'll answer your prayers. At that moment, Imam answers our prayers. It's happened in there are many stories like that. Some of them I can't even narrate from the mimbar for various reasons, but the fact is, know that when your Imam calls you, your Imam is there. There was a war in the last 30 years that's taken place. I'm going to leave it very abstract now. You'll pick up on this if you can pick up. The time when the Shias won, in the last 30 years, when have the Shias won? A time when they won, a young man was interviewed, said that you won, you defeated this very strong army, you were in small numbers. How did you guys win? You know what he replies? He says that we were in the mountain waiting. And in this mountain, we were surrounded by the enemy. Now this is the 20th century, by the way. 21st century, says that we were surrounded by this army. And he says at that time, at Fajr time, we stood up to pray. And at that moment when we prayed for the coming of the Imam, said in the mountain there was a light coming from the door. Says my entire existence shook. And as I saw, a man was coming through that light. And as that man came from the light, and we had been calling the Imam, we asked him, who are you? The reply came, Ana Mawlakum Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. Now without even telling you, I know that your mind has gone to who they were, where they were, how they were, because it was a very big victory. At that moment the Imam then says, I want to see your friends. All of, and this has been published, by the way, so you can look at the documents that have been published. He sees all of them. Then they say to the Imam, Imam, we're outnumbered. Imam says, don't worry. When I give you the instructions, you attack, or when I tell you to hold back, you hold back. By morning time, they'd won. That's the power of the Imam. No, the Imam helps us. No, the Imam is there as a guide for us. But the one thing that we need is the heart to call upon the Imam. These are those nights then when you reconnect. Try and reconnect with the Imam of your time. Do you know how you reconnect? Not in communion. You reconnect when you shut off for a minute and you go into your zone and you yourself privately begin to converse with your Imam. Every night before you go to sleep, even if it's a minute or so, talk to your Imam. Imam, today, this problem befell me. Imam, today, that problem befell me. Talk to your Imam directly. You'll see the Imam will come and help you. In this way, they say there was a tradition. And I'm not going to narrate this tradition. Why? Because you're here for one purpose. As these nights go on, it's very heavy. Tonight you're going to be crying for who? Ali Akbar, right? Very heavy. It's a very heavy night. Mothers will be crying. Fathers will be crying. Tonight is the night of a father. Tonight is the night of a mother. When each one of you cry, right? Pray to Allah for each other. Pray to Allah that He makes our community affluent and prosperous. Pray tonight He helps the people. Pray tonight that all of our du'as are answered. If in these nights our du'as are answered, what nights will our du'as be answered? You know what the story says? The story says in Kashan there was a group of people, there was a Hamla, who about 100 years ago decided to go to Karbala. They say when they got to Karbala, it was a Thursday night. It says that when they walked in on a Thursday night, it was the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And when they walked into Sayyid al-Shuhada, just like me and you, they began to converse. You know what they said to Imam Hussein? They said, Mawla, we've come from very far away. On the way we were looted, we didn't have any food, but we still came because of you. And we came in such a way that we haven't slept all night, but we came because of your love. And as we came in, we were thirsty, but we came because of your love. And at that moment they began to talk to Imam, and at that moment they began to recite. A lecture, a majlis took place. And at that majlis, you know whose musibah was recited? Ali Akbar's musibah. They say they cried so much that it was from the walls there were tears coming almost, people crying. And it was as if from the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada there was crying coming. They said that night they cried to their heart's content, and that night they went to sleep. And as they went to sleep, everyone saw the same dream. You know what that dream was? A person comes to them and he says, get up, Sayyid al-Shuhada is coming. All of those people got up. And as they got up, they looked towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. They said, Mawla, you could have called us, we would have come to you. You didn't need to come to us. Why did you go out of your way? We would have come to you. You know what the Imam alayhi salam says? He replies and he says, tell my Shia, whoever comes to my ziyarah, I come to do their ziyarah. Sayyid al-Shuhada is saying, today if you can't go to Karbala, you can do one thing though, as the sixth Imam says. The sixth Imam says, if you cannot reach my Jad in Karbala, at least you can stand under the sky and say, Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah 3 times. Says that then Imam Hussein answers you. In the same way when Habib was standing there, or Muslim bin Aqil was standing there. If you look at the tradition, it says, as he stood there on Darul Amara, before he was about to be chucked to the ground, what happened? They were about to chuck him. And as they were about to chuck him, he stands up, faces Karbala, and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. In the tradition it says, Sayyid al-Shuhada stands up, looks towards Kufa, replies to the salam, begins to cry. Abul Fadl al-Abbas says, why are you crying for Mawla? He says, because your brother Aqil is in trouble, Muslim bin Aqil is in trouble. He says, why, what's happening? He says, look through my 2 fingers and see. You know what he sees? He sees that Muslim bin Aqil has been grabbed and they're about to chuck him. And as they chuck him and as they decapitate his head, and his head begins to fall, Abbas looks and he says, Mawla, who's that woman sitting there with her abba out like this, ready to catch the head? Sayyid al-Shuhada begins to cry, says, that's my mother Zahra waiting for Muslim bin Aqil's head to come down. See, these are those nights that the people began to cry. They said, Sayyid al-Shuhada, why have you come here for? We could have come to you. He says, know that whenever a person comes for my ziyarah, I come to their ziyarah. Second point now. You know what he says? He says, and give my salam to that person, that muki, who within the mosque straightens the shoes out, who helps. Sayyid al-Shuhada is giving a summary there. He says, whoever helps out in the majlis of Sayyid al-Shuhada, whether it's straightening the shoes, whether it's giving a glass of tea, whether it's doing anything like that for the sake of Sayyid al-Shuhada's salam is for you. Imagine that. Tomorrow everyone should be volunteering when the day of Ashura comes. Why should everyone be? Because Sayyid al-Shuhada's salam is for you. What more do you need than the salam of Sayyid al-Shuhada? But the third thing he says, you know what he says? He says, if it's Karbala and it's a Thursday and it's my shrine, if it's Karbala, if it's a Thursday, if it's my shrine, do not recite the musibah of my son, Ali Akbar, because I can take it, but my mother Zahra comes and she can't take it. When she hears it, she passes out. I don't even have to say anything. When I say Ali Akbar, each one of your heart knows what he stands for. It's very difficult sometimes to narrate the story. Who was Ali Akbar, right? He was that son that was raised by Sayyidah Zainab. Who was Ali Akbar? Ali Akbar was the backbone of Sayyid al-Shuhada. When he used to walk Medina, people would stop just to stare at him because they knew this Yusuf is now walking. So everyone would stare at him. Whenever Sayyid al-Shuhada wanted to do ziyarah of the Prophet, he would look at this Ali Akbar. Who is Ali Akbar? Think about it and see. Backbone of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Where does this story start off from then? This story starts off on the 9th night. Where does it start off? Sayyid al-Shuhada is speaking to a companion of his. This is narrated by the Sunnis. In the books of the Ahl Sunnah it says, Sayyid al-Shuhada begins to walk. And as he begins to walk, this companion begins to walk with him. And as the companion begins to walk, Sayyid al-Shuhada then says, he says that this will be the place where Abbas's arm will be chopped off. And he begins to walk again. He says that this will be the place where Qasim's body is dismembered. And he begins to walk again. He says this is the place where Ali Akbar will fall onto the ground. Finally he comes to a location and he sees that a woman is sitting there dressed in black and she's crying and she says, oh my Hussein, and she begins to clean that maqtal, and as she begins to clean it, this person asks, says, who is that woman? He looks up and he says to that man, he says, go away from here because that's my mother. She's cleaning my maqtal for tomorrow to come. And as she cleans it, she calls out my name because she knows on that day I'll be madhloom. Go back now into the tradition and see. It says that there are 5 maqams that Sayyid al-Shuhada cried aloud. You don't find Sayyid al-Shuhada breaking down, but on 5 maqams. One of the maqam in the tradition it says when Abbas's arm was chopped off, and as his arm fell, when Sayyid al-Shuhada came and he saw the arm of Abbas, he grabbed the arm of Abbas and he began to cry at that location. He says the second time though that location is, that when he was taking Asghar out, as he took him out and as the arrow went, he cried at that location. He said the third time, when he came to the body of Qasim, as he looked at the dismembered body of Qasim, he looked towards him and he said, Qasim, you called me, I came, but I wasn't able to help you, began to cry. But the 3 other locations were to do with this. When Akbar was going, when he fell off the horse, and at the 3rd location when Sayyid al-Shuhada comes to the body of Ali Akbar. Now in the tradition it says, that day comes now, Ashura comes, Sayyid al-Shuhada is standing there, and as Sayyid al-Shuhada is standing there, Ali Akbar comes towards him, and he says towards him, Father, I want to go into the battlefield now. Father, I want to give my life. Go to the maqatil and see. In the tradition it says, Sayyid al-Shuhada raises his hands. He says, Allah, bear witness that I am sending that son, who whenever I wanted to do ziyarah of the Prophet, I would look at him. He says at that moment, he says, you can go, but you have to ask permission from 4 people. He says, who are they? He says, number 1 is Sayyidah Zainab, the other one is your mother, and the other one is Zain al-Abidin, and the other one then finally comes to Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know the part that shakes Sayyid al-Shuhada? You know the part that shakes Zahra? The 12th Imam was asked once. The 12th Imam was asked. He says that we've heard that Abbas and Ali Akbar were both equal to Sayyid al-Shuhada. Tell us which one did he love the most? Imam al-Zaman replies. He says that Abbas was Aziz, but Sayyid al-Shuhada Shuhada, for Akbar had this love in his heart. He was Mahbub, the other one was Aziz. So look at Sayyid al-Shuhada, look at the love that he has. In the tradition it says, he gets up and he goes to the tent of Sayyidah Zainab, and as he walks in the tent, Sayyidah Zainab knows why it's come for. They say Sayyidah Zainab, he goes to the lap of Sayyidah Zainab, he puts his head on her lap, she begins to comb his hair, and at that moment he says to Sayyidah Zainab, he says, aunt, can I go into the maqtal? Father has asked me to seek permission. At that moment she looks up and she says, son, I've given you permission, go. Don't ask me for anything more. They say he gets up, he goes to the tent of his mother, and as he walks into the tent of his mother, you know what his mother looks at him and says that this place, I'm alone here. I don't have anyone. I don't have any family. All I have is you, son. And if you were to go, what would happen? I have no one there. One poet writes, the poet writes this. This says when Layla looks up towards him, in his poetry writes, he says when Layla looked towards him, he says, Zainab raised you all of these years. I gave you to Zainab to raise, but son, I was watching you at every step, and everything that you did, I was watching you. This poet writes, he says that Layla gets up, and poetry has no fact to it, but he says that this Layla gets up, and you know what she says? She says, son, you see that trove over there? Within that are clothes there. And as she goes towards him, the poet recites, he says that she opens the trove, she takes out a piece of cloth, she says, but son, know that for every single year that I was watching you, I kept your clothes there. This is when you were 6 months and you started to walk for the first time. This is when you were 1 year. And in this way, the poet talks about the heart of Layla. He gets to a stage, says Layla's heart was breaking when Akbar was going. But one thing Akbar says, he looks towards Layla, says, mother, tell me that on the day of judgment, if Zahra comes to you and says, my son went and your son remained, what are you going to say on that day? She goes, son, why don't you go? As he gets up and he walks out, he goes into another tent, and that tent is the tent of Imam Zain al-Abidin. The tradition says his tears now come out, and he sits there in front of Imam Zain al-Abidin. Imam Zain al-Abidin is unconscious. As the tears drip on the head of Imam Zain al-Abidin, he begins to kiss his hands and his feet. Imam Zain al-Abidin wakes up. He says, brother, what has happened that you're kissing me like this? What has happened that you're crying like this? He looks up and he says, our father is alone in Karbala. He has no one. He is alone. He's thirsty. He's madloom. He has no one. Imam Zain al-Abidin looks up. He says, brother, if I had the permission, I would go and fight. Both brothers cried. At that moment, they say, Ali Akbar now gets up. He goes towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. This is what breaks Fatima al-Zahra's heart. This particular point. He says, now he comes, and as he comes towards Sayyid al-Shuhada looks towards him, and he looks to him and he says, son, I've got one dream in my heart. All my life I had this one dream. He says, you know what it was? To tie the amama on your head. He says, when you were a child, your mother would tie it. And when you grew up and when you got married, say that Zainab tied it. He says, all my life I was waiting for that moment to tie it. He says, I never got that moment. He says, can I tie it just one time today? He says Akbar, both of his knees, because he was tall, he bends his knees down onto the floor. In the tradition it says, when Rasulullah in the battle of Khaybar was tying the amama on Amir al-Mu'mineen's head, he would tie it and he would recite, Nasrun min Allahi wa fatun qareeb. In the same way, an old father with a white beard, the tradition says, an old father to his young son takes the amama and he begins to tie it. And as he begins to tie it, he begins to recite, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And as he recites this, Akbar gets up. Imam Hussein says one thing. He says, Akbar, I'm a father. As you go into the maqtal, please just look behind me and see. Just look behind. Just show me your face so that I can see your face. They say Akbar gets on. A Christian narrator says, he says, as this young man began to ride, as his horse became faster, an old father was running behind the horse. An old man, as he begins to run, Akbar looks behind. He says, father, why are you running behind the horse for? Why don't you go back? Why don't you stop? You know, the reply was, he says, Akbar, if only you had a son like mine, you would have realized what's going on this father's. He says, as he went out and as he began to fight, Layla, Imam could see that Layla's feet are coming out of the tent. This mother can't take it. He goes towards this mother. He knows that this mother can die here. If not, he goes up to her. He says, Layla, do one thing. Go inside the tent. Pray 2 units of praise. I've heard from my Jad, the Prophet, that if a mother prays for a son, the dua comes true. Why don't you pray that your son comes back to me? At that moment, she raises her hands. She says, Oh Allah, oh the one who united Yusuf with Yaqub, oh the one who united Ismail with Hajra. for the sake of the thirst of Abi Abdullah, return Akbar back. They say Akbar does come back. As he comes back, he says, Father, I'm thirsty and my coat of mail is very heavy. He says, Father, I'm thirsty. I asked one Arif once, I said, didn't Akbar know that father had no water? He replied that he knew there was one reason why. When the father said, put your tongue in my mouth, there was a reason for this. And he says the reason, batin reason was this, that Akbar was saying, Father, remove the look of imamat from me. As long as you are looking at me with the look of imamat, no one can touch me. I want to die, Father. Remove your eyes from me so that I can die. They say Akbar now goes into the battlefield. He takes off his coats of armor, and as he goes into the battlefield, one guy comes. Hasin ibn Nubair says, he says, I'm going to do something that's going to make that old man cry. He says, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to take this lance and I'm going to put it through that young man. As he grabs the lance and as he begins to chuck that lance, in the tradition it says from the back it pierces him and it goes through the front. And as it goes through the front, the only person who didn't call for Sayyid al-Shuhada was Ali Akbar. As he falls, he says, Father, don't come here. Don't look at this. They say Hussein ibn Nubair lifts up Ali Akbar on the spear. The spear shatters. He falls to the ground. At that moment, they say they saw an old father walking on his hands and his knees. His eyesight had gone. His back had broken. On his hands and knees, he begins to crawl towards his son. And as he crawls towards his son, he says, son, I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. Call me son, I don't want to live anymore. Says after you living is gone. He says he comes to his son is covering his chest. He says, take your hands off your chest. Know that I'm the son of Haydar al-Qarrar. He says, open his chest. He says, as he opened it, he saw that there was a spear in there. You know what he does? One knee he puts on the chest of Akbar. The other one he puts on the ground of Karbala. Looks toward Najaf. He says, Father, help me. As he rips this out, the liver of Akbar comes out. There's an earthquake. Sayyidah Zainab looks up to Imam Zain al-Abidin. Imam Zain al-Abidin wakes up. He says, why is there an earthquake coming? She goes, look for yourself. He removes the tent. What does he see? An old father carrying the dead body of his son. At that moment he says, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Mata mein Hussain.